life. So let's come back to this matter. One of our guests on the program, when it comes, will be able to analyze. He has experience and knowledge in economics. But let's come on to the style of leadership of the president. I have joining me via Skype Mr. Bwala. He's a member of the APC and a lawyer. Thank you so much, Mr. Bwala, for joining us today. When the president says again that, and maybe Baba goes slow, but I have not looted. So whoever calls me Baba goes slow, I'm very cautious of historical antecedents. So as Nigerians, a lot of the question will be on the minds of a lot of Nigerians who are looking forward to perhaps a miracle from this government that they voted into office. The question of him being Baba goes slow, is it acceptable to Nigerians, or they just want performance?
Well, thank you for having me. It will all depend on how people view it. I look at it from the perspective of the expectation that the Nigerian people had for the president as at the time he was elected. I recall prior to the 2015 election, so much. You can even remember that when he won the election, even before he was sworn in as the president, there was this report that at our various airports, some of the officials at airport were stopping perceived corrupt officials from traveling abroad. So there was so much expectation. There are people who even classify or view him as a messiah. And where your expectation is beyond reality, is definitely by the time you begin to operate in your style of governance, people will see it as slow. No doubt there are one or two areas that requires improvement. But if you look at it, especially what Afolabi said, which he can speak more to the economic issues, due process of law is what will determine whether the governance that we talk about is speedy or is slow. If you look at our bureaucratic nature and the way we run things in this country, I will give you an example. If you ask people to come to bid, look at the way these things will follow. If you come to government, talk about appointment, employment, every aspect of our economy, you discover that the participation of the people is so much embedded in corruption or in corrupt practices, nepotism, and all that, all of these things that we talk about. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is very easy for you to look at the president and say, he's too slow. But if you look at it realistically, on the basis of what we found and what we are working with, I don't think you will give a negative mark to the president.
Just hold it for a moment, because there'll be one or two instances that we will dwell on. We'll go for a break, and when we come back, we continue with the conversation. Are you satisfied with the pace of President Muhammadu Buhari's approach to governance? What are your expectations? We deal with those expectations when we come back from this break, everyone. Jonathan. Welcome back, everyone, and let's get back quickly to the conversation. I've now been joined on the program from our Abuja studio by the presidential candidate of the ANRP, an economic analyst, Mr. Fasua, is in our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, Mr. Fasua, for coming on tonight. Oh, there he is. So let's get back to the conversation. We started the conversation before we got through to Mr. Fasua. Now, the issues on the table is that the president said, look, maybe Baba goes slow, but I did not loot. Today, the federal government has approved 267 million naira as part of the social investment program. They said that 250 billion has so far been released since 2016. So if you add 267 million to 250 billion naira, looking at how many people that have benefited from it, there's about 10 million direct beneficiaries so far. Your assessment, Mr. Fasua, from your economic analyst point of view.
Thank you very much. When I heard the news of what the approval they gave today, 227 million or thereabout for the whole of Northwest and Southeast, I just felt the amount was way too low. But basically, I think it's for training in some handicrafts and, some of those skills, for youth in those two regions, which is not a bad idea if that's the case, but I'd say that it is a bit quite low, if you ask me. I mean, from what you just read now, they said they spent about 250 billion earlier on and so on. How much is 220 million compared to 250 billion? We would like to have, though, the accounting for the 250 billion or so that they had spent earlier on. It won't be a bad idea if they're a little bit more transparent with the figures and with the accounting for some of this money they're spending, because look, things like social intervention is actually usually fraught with a lot of fraud. It's quite open and susceptible to fraud, and we wouldn't be, we don't want any of those things happening in this country. Regarding, the president saying that people call him go slow, I'm not sure anyone has called him that of late. I think he's the one calling himself that. I mean, you probably can be sure that if you give the president the mic, he's going to tell you about corruption. He's going to tell you about people calling him go slow and all of that. He's going to tell you the history of when he came in 1984. I think what this does is just to say that, look, you can't change an old person. You can't learn how to write with your left hand at old age. So the onus is on the vice president to chip in and to ensure that he runs the economy properly, and any other person around him to do the job. But the man has just told us that that is what he is, and I'm sure he reasons around those circles, basically.
Let me ask you, from your own critical mindset on the issues of economy, is it a good time to be a welfarist government with the state of Nigeria's economy?
Well, people tend to believe that the present government is a welfarist government. I don't believe the government is a welfarist government. I mean, even some of the capitalist governments abroad, we know some of the welfare packages they have for their people. In places like the United States of America, you don't go to sleep hungry except you want to. Even in many places, there are places like food kitchens where you go to as a homeless person and all of that and get some. And in many places, places like Switzerland, a friend of mine was telling me he lives there. Do you know that in Switzerland, if you lose your job, the government pays you 80% of your salary for 8 months at least, depending when you get another job. And if you actually retire, a lot of people are there, even from Africa, who don't want to leave Switzerland, as expensive as it is. Because if you retire in Switzerland, your pension is stratospheric, and you're going to maintain that until you die. Those are countries. You wonder what kind of thing we're practicing here. So listen, have we seen the salutary effects of these welfare programs on the streets? I mean, Nigeria is still the most unequal country in the world. As I was coming here, I was reading a report by Daily Trust where they talked about these women who carry triplets and sit on some of these pedestrian bridges in this Abuja. There's so many of those triplets right there in the sun. Anyone who comes from abroad and sees that will just wonder what kind of people we are. We haven't actually started to show that we value human lives in this country. So, however, back to your question, I would say that for a country that has been so far back and with all the symptoms of economic depression, not recession, because the symptoms of economic depression is, of course, high crime rates, high poverty rates, high unemployment rates. Those are the things. These things have lived with this country for so long. A report came out a couple of days back talking about misery index. Nigeria was number 6. I probably will say it should be a little bit higher than number 6, because some of the countries I saw there, are livable. Our people even run there. I mean, look at a country like Libya, again at war, but Nigerians are still running into Libya. That tells you something. So Nigeria does need some welfarists at this point in time, given the statistics we have about the suffering and the misery that people are going through. Yes, I support the welfare. However, it has to be, number one, properly accounted for, properly followed up. And of course, I would say that the best welfarist program is job creation. And I've always said that, look, there are jobs in this country, even in the public sector. Rather than give people money for nothing, give them money for work done. Create the jobs. The jobs are there. In security, in environment. We're looking, if we had 1 million teachers in this country, they would be absorbed if only they did the job. I went out on campaigns. I went to parts of this country, especially in the core north. There were schools I went into, there were no teachers. I mean, zero. In the one I found the most teachers was 2 teachers for primary 1 to 6. You know what I'm saying? And even the Empower people, they posted to some of those places where they were not reporting. They told me they don't report. So they Empower, they pay them 30,000, okay. They take 15,000 and share the other one out. So there's work in security, in environment, there's work in education.
Let me pause you for a moment. Let me pause you for a moment, Mr. Fasua. Yeah. Let me pause you for a moment. Let me bring in Mr. Bwala. Your point of view, Mr. Bwala, on the expectations on the president, his government, and the approach to what is we're gradually entering into the second term of this administration. Your view on what must be done immediately to live up to expectation for this government?
First of all, the problem is not with the government. The problem is with the system. And except somebody wants to be pretentious about it, if you look at, for example, the judiciary, from when you file your case in court to when the judgment is obtained, doesn't it take a long time? If you look at the legislative arm of government, from when bill is submitted to the National Assembly to when it is passed into law, it takes a lot of time. Except if people want to live pretending as, for example, what the other man in the studio said is factually wrong. Because if you have heard Tokwe talked about Empower program that gives skills acquisition, and there is
we lost him there, but that's how far we can go right here on the program. Thank you so much, Mr. Tokwe Fasua, for your thoughts tonight on the program, and also Mr. Daniel Bwala. Thank you so much, everyone. That's our show for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye-bye.